Hey, David Brewster here with a new episode of Soloing Secrets, and this is Mick Taylor, and I've had a lot of requests to feature this legendary icon of British blues rock. Mick's been on the scene since around 1964, former member of John Mayall's Blues Breakers, former member of the Rolling Stones, and tons of other appearances and groups, solo artists, lots of stuff. And it's really interesting that Mick was only 18 years old when he joined forces with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. And Eric Clapton was a direct influence on Mick. So it's really interesting that the teenage Mick Taylor was literally filling, Eric Clapton's shoes when he worked with the Blues Breakers. I think he cut like 4 albums with John. But that's really interesting. And then to hear what he did with John Mayall when he was literally a teenager is just, it's like, wow, that's so impressive. A legend. Now, speaking of John Mayall's Blues Breakers, there are 3 albums that were released in 1966 and 1967 that completely redefined and reshaped blues rock music. That's Blues Breakers with Eric Clapton, A Hard Road with Peter Green, and Crusade with Mick Taylor. These 3 albums changed everything. Now, just like we've done in other episodes in the Soloing Secrets series, when you're checking out a certain player or band, it's always a great idea to scope out their influences. And here are some of Mick Taylor's elusive musical influences. And this definitely reveals where a lot of his licks and ideas came from. And as far as some of the artists and bands that Mick's worked with in his career, here's an image with some of the people that he's recorded with or performed with on stage. And there's a ton of people. John Mayall's Blues Breakers, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan. Eventually started working with people like Gong and Joan Jett. But check this out. Now, as far as some of Mick Taylor's actual soloing secrets, the things he typically does when he grabs a guitar and plays a lick or a fill or a solo or a song, and there's a lot. There's authentic and modified blues phrasing, various pentatonic scales, expressive bending and vibrato, melodic and rhythmic motifs and things like that. But also this just thick, biting tone and attack. Definitely, especially when he was working with John Mayall. No offense to the Stones, but Mick's style kind of changed when he was working with the Stones. I kind of prefer the Mayall years because he was really edgy. He had plenty of room to stretch out and solo and stuff. And definitely a very impressive guitarist. And here's his soloing secrets. Now, the music and examples in this episode actually came from 2 albums, and I'm basically just pulling Mick Taylor ideas from 2 John Mayall albums, Crusade and Bare Wires. And there's 2 additional John Mayall albums I could have, picked music from, but I didn't. Not to mention 9 Stones albums, 3 Dylan albums, couple, solo albums, and lots of other stuff. But like I mentioned just a minute ago, those John Mayall years, really Mick was stretching out, lots of licks and guitar solos and stuff. There's a lot more to kind of dive into. So that's basically what I dove into in this lesson. So here we go. With the opening jam, that was Hartley Quits from the album Bare Wires. Definitely a very interesting album, and that's a really interesting song, too. It's an instrumental, and Mick has plenty of time, to run around and play. But there's a lot of interesting things hiding in this song. First of all, you may notice there's a lot of overdrive, more than Mick used on Crusade, and noticeably more than Clapton and Peter Green used on the previous, Blues Breaker albums. But there's this really, funky bend in the beginning, like this. That's really unusual, because we're basically playing a blues in F, right, or F7. So, typically you would think of this, bending that B flat up and then catching that C and that F, but that's not what Mick's doing here. He's actually bending that B flat, and then I'm using my pinky there, but grabbing that E flat and A flat like that. You could also do that with your third finger, but you probably want to reinforce that bend if you can, because that B flat's going all the way up to a C, a whole step. So it's almost a country sounding bend, like a pedal steel, but it's kind of a sick pedal steel like that. And then do it again. Then you start separating like this. Really obnoxious, but it's cool. And then he starts doing the slip and slide blues riff. And you go into the 4 chord there, that B flat, then it goes to F. Then go to the 5 chord C and do it. B flat. And then kind of end on F. And right there, you're going to do that E flat to F and then end on C, so it kind of ends on the 5 chord. Right? So after that runs its course, then you hear this kind of almost big band sounding thing. Like that. So think, F hybrid or, F minor and major, pentatonic, and he's doing... You're going to basically do that twice in a row. Then the third time, you're going to slide that C to D, and then you're going to catch this that C and that E flat right there. And you're going to basically come down like that. So you're doing... And right there at the end, it's kind of tricky because you're doing the hammer-ons right there, but then that last time you want to do a slide. And then catch... So you're doing this, that double stop on the 3rd fret, double stop on the 1st fret, and then hammer on that minor to major 3rd, that A flat to A. Like that. And then do it again. Then we're going to do the exact same thing in B flat right here. Go back to F. Then he starts doing almost the Steve Cropper kind of stuff. Right? Kind of sliding all those sixths. And then he does some licks here. Actually, I was jamming during that intro and just kind of playing around. But there are a few licks that I grabbed from this beginning of his lead. So after that... he does... And listen to that lick in the song, because it has this just biting guitar tone. It just grabs your attention like that. And it's almost like a modified Clapton lick, because he's ending on C, but he's playing it as the 5th of F's, because it hasn't gone to the 5 chord. He's just playing that lick that way. And then he starts doing... And that's really interesting where he's doing that. You're grabbing that G there. And then he does the typical, or whatever, and it keeps going, of course. But there's some really interesting licks, and his tone is interesting in that song. I was playing around, just jamming there, and then eventually you do hear him do this. Right there, just that that kind of repetitive motif, you know, melodic, rhythmic motif. And then I continue there. Of course, Mick didn't do that. I just kind of added that to my lead there. Just kind of playing around there, but that's definitely Hartley Quits, just kind of playing around with it. Okay, next up are some licks from the song Oh Pretty Woman from the album Crusade, definitely a legendary song, and the riff to Oh Pretty Woman is set up almost like a lick, so it's like a blues in F sharp or F sharp 7, like. Think of like the F sharp or F sharp minor pentatonic box right there, climbing up chromatically on the D. And then right there when you get back to that chromatic move, one more time for that first part. When you get to that F sharp again, you're going to come down kind of quickly like that. And that's the part that almost makes the riff feel more like a lick. And then you hear some licks and stuff kind of being sprinkled in, and Mick's playing out of the Albert King box. So think of F sharp minor pentatonic box right there. Move to the position right after that. And then right there is your Albert King box. Right? And he starts doing like that. So you're grabbing that F sharp, you know, over to that C sharp and then back to F sharp. And he does the slide and ends on that E. And then eventually he does this big fill that takes you back to the riff. Like that. And that fill, just grab that B, bend it up to C sharp with some vibrato. Kind of exaggerated right there, and then come down. And once again, he's kind of doing almost like a modified Clapton lick there. And you're catching that C sharp, which is the 5th. Like that. You know, something like that. Beginning of the solo of Oh Pretty Woman, you'll hear Mick do this. So we're basically playing out of this position now of F sharp minor pentatonic, right? And he does that really kind of typical, you know, kind of opening lick. That's definitely been around the block more than a kid with a new bicycle right there. And then like that. And there's a lot of index finger bending going on, especially in this lick coming up next. There's a lick before it. Like right that, and you're basically bending that A up to kind of like a half step to A sharp, and then you hear him grab B, and then he starts bending with his index finger like that. And that's really interesting. I'm a fan of index finger bending. Albert King definitely revolutionized that for sure. And it's hard because you don't have any, you know, fingers to reinforce the bend. You're just relying on that one finger right there, your index finger. And those big throaty bends kind of reminds me of Clapton, but Mick definitely has his own kind of touch and sound there. Last but not least, I'm going to share some licks and ideas from the song Driving Sideways. This is from the album Crusade, and it actually opens with the same bend that we saw in Hartley Quits, but we're in a different key and it's using a different rhythm. And the licks in the song are just dynamite, like this. something like that. So it's actually starting with that same weirdo bend that we had with Hartley Quits, but now he's basically, you know, we're playing it right here, and he's doing... And at the end you hear him release that bend, so we're bending that C up to that D right there, right? And we're doing that. And then just end with that G triad right there, G major. Then after that part, when he comes in with his licks, it's like the Kool-Aid Man just breaking through a wall with all this coolness right here. Or something like that. So after the weirdo bend, that G triad, then you're doing this. And it's really just 3 notes, but there's so much expression, and he's milking, you know, the notes around. You're just playing C, B flat, and G, but there's so much, you know, character and personality there. And then... So there's that call and response phrasing happening right there, because the first phrase, that's like the call, right? And then... And there's the response. And then he does another lick right here. Like that. And then... And that's definitely a signature thing you're going to hear from Mick and many other blues rock guitarists. You know, grabbing the root and then grabbing the minor third and kind of bending it or sliding it off. Like that. You know, really expressive, but just really cool licks throughout that entire jam. And this one's also an instrumental too. But right there, so tasty and so cool, and just a classic right there. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Soloing Secrets with this look at Mick Taylor. Definitely a legendary guitarist, still alive, still active out there, and you know, it's really interesting to notice, you know, those players that worked with John Mayall and they literally kind of reshaped or changed the game. Clapton, Peter Green, and Mick Taylor. Now I have featured Clapton in a Soloing Secrets, and there is a Peter Green chord play, but Peter Green is coming. He's very well going to be next. And it's just interesting that all 3 of those players influenced millions of guitarists all over the world, and they all 3 also worked with John Mayall, the late great blues, you know, legend. So I just find that really interesting. Of course, I'm a sucker for rock music history or just music history in general, and there's something about that. You can hear it. There's magic on those songs and on those albums. You know, very important and very special stuff. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.